Well, welcome to this week's episode of Gain and Glow, a healthy lifestyle podcast with me, Vanessa.
And me, Crystal.
We're coming back with...
We're back.
We're back.
I know it's been a minute. I mean, last episode, I feel like we were pretty pumped about sharing like that we're going to have more going on with our Instagram and creating YouTube and stuff. And that kind of got knocked back a little bit with with the pandemic.
Yeah.
But I think that's mostly because, like everybody else, we're all going through this in our own way. And some days are just harder than others.
And it really doesn't matter who you are or what side of the fence you stand on. This is probably one of the most universally stressful times for every single person. And we've definitely, obviously, have been struggling probably just like everyone else. So it's caused us a little bit of a delay in some social media stuff, and we haven't really recorded as much, but one of the most important things we wanted to talk about today was mental health, because it's just so present in everybody's life right now.
Yeah. And we've made it a point to be a positive, healthy lifestyle podcast. And I think we're just going to be just going to share a little bit more of our experiences moving forward. And, because I mean, everyone's going through a rough time, and there's no reason to like gloss over that.
Absolutely. I know that we've been really hesitant to go too, I guess, negative, or we've been really hyper focused on keeping things so positive because we feel like that's really what everyone needs right now. But I think it's really important that we also be really real and honest, and it's really hard to give advice when you're also struggling. And I think that the best advice is that you're not alone in that struggle. And even though it feels impossible, sometimes it's most of the time it's not impossible to work through it. And as long as we know we have a community of people behind us, it makes it that much easier. So we just felt the need to be a little bit more real. So we're changing a little bit of our format. We're changing a little bit of how things are going to go and what we're going to talk about, but we're still going to keep it positive and keep it light. But we just think that it would be insensitive to try to gloss over everything that's going on, because there is so much going on right now.
Definitely.
And I know for me personally, just kind of like jumping into it, I guess, it's interesting how anxiety and depression present themselves, because I've been really excited about us taking some time to really learn and listen obviously with the Black Lives Matter movement and with the conversation of race in our country. It gives us a moment to kind of pause and think about how we operate and where we play in that and where our place is. We're both biracial individuals, even though we don't necessarily appear that way, and we don't really see the world in a certain definitive way like that, but it still has an impact on everybody. And I think it's important that we've taken some time to understand how this whole movement's affecting us and where we have a role in it. And with that comes a lot of, like, I think anxiety and overthinking and isolation, because it's really hard to know how to navigate something so huge, but also so detailed and complex. It's such a complex situation. And then combine that with the whole pandemic and the two of us both pretty much being on lockdown. It really becomes overwhelming, and it's hard to focus on anything creative, because I know personally I'm finding myself struggling to understand what to do and what's right and what's wrong, and that kind of just plays into everything. And I think that everybody's kind of feeling that way right now.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, I think I think you nailed it. So before you share your story a little bit about your journey with depression and anxiety, I just wanted to give you guys our dope quote of the week.
Yes.
So this quote comes from Joseph Campbell, who wrote The Power of Myth. People say that what we're all looking for is a meaning for life. I don't think that's what we're really seeking. I think that what we're seeking is an experience of being alive.
And that's such a poignant quote because it's true. I think a lot of us are on this journey of where happiness and like a happy life and overall general happiness is like an end goal or a destination, but in reality it should just be part of the journey. Like the life that we're trying to live, it's all a journey. It's there's no end goal. There's no, oh, I'm going to be happy when I get to one place. And I think those of us who suffer with anxiety and depression really struggle to toggle that in our minds. At least I know I do personally. And I have dealt with anxiety and depression pretty much my whole life as far back as I can remember. And it's funny because when I was younger, I was diagnosed with asthma, and it was like 50% a medical condition and 50% psychosomatic. Because at the time, we didn't realize I also suffered from panic attacks. And a lot of times, a panic attack can represent itself or manifest itself in a way that makes you feel like you can't breathe. And then that would like trigger my asthma. And so that's like one of those things I have where breathing is like a really big thing for me. Like one of my fears is to not be able to breathe. And so obviously with this pandemic going on, every like 5 minutes in my mind, I'm like obsessing over the idea of, okay, can I breathe? Am I feeling sick? And I think it's really playing into like my anxieties, and I find myself having to really center myself and mentally realign to move past some of that. And then I feel like it just compounds itself with also the anxiety and the depression that's come from being so isolated and honestly changing everything about routine, and my lifestyle has completely been turned upside down. And so I think that has also exacerbated a lot of the anxiety and the depression that I've been dealing with in the past, working through and coping with. And it's interesting how your brain can tell you that everything that you're feeling is only yours and that you're alone in that. And it's so hard to kind of break out of that. And I think that that's the largest effect that I've had from everything that's going on, is just feeling so isolated, and how confusing and scary and crazy it all is. And that's something that it also I feel like it's just stunted my creativity so much, and I've not had the wherewithal to like work through that and push myself up until this point.
Definitely. I so agree with that. Um I I guess about three or so years ago I had my first like round of depression, and it was mostly just wanting, it was like winter. It was kind of when I just blamed the winter because I'm from Southern California and I moved to Portland, Oregon. And even though it's like the winter's not really like snow and stuff, it's dark and cloudy a lot of the time. And I probably wasn't getting enough vitamin D. I definitely wasn't moving very much. I was just kind of going from building to inside another building, and that kind of repetition was pretty unhealthy for me. And even switching jobs, and then life happens, like my car broke down, like I moved, my job became farther away. I had to take public transit an hour each way, and I was like telling myself, man, this really sucks, and I wish I didn't have to do this. And then I felt like, well, I'm stuck here. And and feeling stuck is kind of like a crutch, and also a relief, because you're like, well, I have to do this. So there's no point in being upset about it. And guess what? Your brain's like, nah, you are upset. Stop ignoring your feelings. And so really from a combination of those things, I ended up having like, my first like panic attack on our Max up. That's what they call like our subway up system up here. And it was such a weird feeling. It was such a weird, I never had that experience before. I was like, is it my heart? Do I need to go see a doctor? And I immediately was like, that's all I thought of. I was like, this isn't anxiety. This isn't, anything. And anything under my control. And I went to the doctor. He's like, oh, you had a panic attack. And he's like, and I'm concerned that you're going to just have more because from what you're telling me about your life, which I felt very fortunate to have found a doctor who wanted to talk to me and hear what my day to day was like so he could figure out what was going on with me. And he gave me anxiety medication right away. I can't remember what it was called, but it was basically to treat panic attacks. And let me tell you that stuff was like a tranquilizer. Like, yeah, he was like, "You're not gonna want to operate machinery," and I was like, "I don't have a car. It's fine." So one day, like it started happening more frequently. He's like, "But it's gonna take a couple of weeks to actually work through your system and help you." And I was like, "Well, I don't even want to take this. Like, I just had one panic attack. Like, I don't think I need medication." And he goes, well, he's like, I think this is just going to help you, kind of get through this, and we'll just keep checking in and all that. So I waited a couple weeks before I started taking it, and then by that time I had already had a couple more panic attacks, so then I had to wait another 2 weeks for the medicine to start kicking in, so that I would have less. And then I was like, oh my God, is this my life now? Am I just gonna have panic attacks like seemingly randomly throughout the day? Like, when you kind of get caught in a thought loop, sometimes you're not as aware, sometimes you are. But I just felt like I was just sitting there working, and then I just start having one, and then you just feel this rush, and then you can't calm down, and then you feel really stuck. Then you feel like a rat in a cage, and you're like, well, I can't leave. I just can't just leave my job because I'm having a panic attack. So that was a lot to deal with. And then talking to him some more, like checking in with him, the more he asked me questions, the more I was getting upset. And he said, I want you to take bupropion, which is like the generic of Wellbutrin, which is something that helps with depression, but also helps with people stopping smoking. It's like that's another common use of it. And he's like, I want you to start taking this and like with it, and then only use the panic attack stuff when you have one. And I had already like tried not to use it because it would hit you so hard that you would get drowsy. Like you felt like you took a melatonin in the middle of the day and you're just sitting there like, I feel fuzzy. I can't do anything. And then, when you're sleepy and someone tries to talk to you or move around, it kind of just ramps up your anxiety. You're like, I can't focus on you. So it's just making me feel a little worse. And then he recommended therapy, and I was like, ugh, I have to go to therapy. I was like, I don't have a car. I had to ride a bus after work, 30 minutes, the wrong direction from my house, so that I could meet with a therapist. But thankfully, after all this time, I had already used up my deductible, so it was really cheap for me to see the therapist. Until thankfully, a year later, it wasn't. It was like $150 a visit, even though I had good health insurance, and I was like, oh man, like I can't. Like it's crazy how expensive it is to take care of yourself, even mental health. Like I was thankfully by that point I felt like I had more tools in my tool bag to help me deal with depression and anxiety. But as soon as I sat in that chair and he asked me 3 questions just trying to get to know me, I just started bawling. And I was like, I don't know you. I'm here trying to trust you to help me, and I am losing it, and I feel so embarrassed, and I feel like so worried, and I just felt so wrapped up that this is my life now. And but it's not true. It's like you do all those things. You take medication if you need to. You see a therapist, which I recommend, even if you don't have, even if you feel like you're okay, especially right now. And I think there's a big push in like our social media about talking to somebody even through an app, like even just having someone to text, like because connection is huge. Like humans are wired for connection, and so when you start being depressed and anxious, either or, it's pretty isolating because you want to make yourself feel better and you don't want to show that you're not feeling good to other people. So, funny enough, in preparing for this talk, I was kind of thinking of, how do you spot, how would people who don't know what depression, anxiety like would spot it? And so I found this article on thehealthy.com, and it had a few hidden signs of depression. And so as I read these, you guys are going to be like, yeah, I think you just talked about all this. um, so hiding from your feelings. If you feel like once you start to open up to somebody that you're just going to fall apart, you are experiencing depression. You wouldn't say you're happy or unhappy. A lot of times depression is it kind of comes in almost like episodes, and it's a daily struggle, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're sad all day. Like there are a lot of people who can manage to make it to go to work and do stuff, but it doesn't really mean that they're, giving it all they can, or they're able to do things.
And I think that that's so important for people to understand is depression doesn't mean that you're just sad all the time. It manifests itself in so many different ways. Sometimes it's really just almost like a feeling of emotional neutrality, where it's nothing's good, nothing's bad, it just is. And a lot of people can laugh to your face and be very depressed behind the scenes.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm one of those people. Like I laugh regardless of what's going on with me. I think people are the most scared when I'm quiet. So, oh, there must be something wrong. But yeah, some other things are you've carefully constructed a very busy life to help avoid your feelings. And I was like, check that box. I was like, I'm riding the train. I'm going to work. I'm coming back. I'm reading, or I'm listening to a podcast on my way home. Like, I got this. And it's like, well, you're kind of just ignoring your feelings. Random things make you mad. I know at the height of my depression, oh boy, anyone could say almost anything. And just kind of depending on like where I was at in my mood or my mentally, it was like, don't even ask me if I want water. Like, just don't. Like, um, you're acting recklessly, maybe giving in a little bit more to alcohol, or being a little bit like, risky in, gambling or doing things that are just kind of risky. You aren't thinking clearly. You might feel like you have a sluggish mind, or your thoughts are murky. And I think that's pretty huge, because I know with both, I think both on both sides of depression and anxiety, you tend to think and overthink, and then think about why you're thinking like that, and then think about why you're acting like this. And it just creates a pretty bad thought cycle, which really even takes you further away from yourself. You just kind of, it's like almost like a distraction that you want to so that you can feel like you have control over it, but it's not really providing control. When you are introspective to a fault, I mean, I think that kind of ties along with it. So what I just said, I think I kind of just blended those two together. And then lastly, you stop enjoying activities you previously loved. And I feel like when you are down, you don't want to do anything. And when people tell you, like, oh, you should just cheer up, or oh, you should just paint more, like you should just read more, you should just, and it's like, yeah, you should do things that make you happy even when they're not necessarily making you happy, because it's part of conditioning your mind to be who you want to be, even though those feelings aren't attached to those activities. But it's definitely hard. It's hard to do anything because you feel like your energy's already gone. You don't have that energy.
Especially if you're spending a lot of time being introspective with your anxiety or depression, and really over analyzing yourself and the way you're thinking. I know that a lot of times when I fall into like a depressive state and I'm starting to sit there for a little bit too long, in my mind I start to almost attack my own character. Like, my first thought is, I wish that somebody, like, I had someone to make me feel better, or I want to talk to somebody. And then I'll write a text out and delete it probably 4 or 5 times, because in my mind I'm just being a burden, or I'm whining, or I'm bothering that person, or what if they're having a good day and I text them and I'm being negative. And it's really hard to get through that, and it almost in itself becomes so exhausting that it drains you like that much more.
Yeah.
And it's hard to move through that. And I know the last few weeks I've kind of been in a little bit of a state of that, where I go to reach out to someone and then I talk my own self out of it. I already make the assumption for them that they don't want to talk to me, or that they're not going to help me out, or that I'm going to bother them, which is almost disrespectful of them. It's like not giving my friends and my family and my support circle credit for how supportive they actually really are.
Absolutely. And it's like you know that you're not even feeling great. So to try, I mean, I think we should never hold such expectations of other people in general. So it's like, just send the text. And I know I've gotten texts back who are like, oh, I can't talk right now. And then I start crying and I'm like, see? But it's like, it's not that they're not going to talk to me. It's like, you can't talk to me right now.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody that cares about you is like, nah, I don't want to talk to you.
And I think too, like, I'm glad that you went over these like signs, because I think our society has now become more and more open and receptive to mental health and taking care of mental health, and accepting that it's so much more common than we realize. And I think it's more common than we realize, because so many of us are restricting ourselves from actually reaching out. And thankfully now everyone is becoming more receptive, but it's also really important to identify that in yourself and know that you can be a genuinely happy and successful person and still feel these things, and have every right to feel these things. I think there's a lot of individuals out there, especially right now, if you haven't previously dealt with anxiety and depression, and now you're experiencing the global pandemic that is literally worldwide, in addition to the racial issues that are ever present in our society and worldwide, I think it's hard to accept that you need to actually reach out. If you haven't previously felt depression or anxiety, and now you all of a sudden are, you might not even realize that's what you're feeling. You might just think that you're feeling down, or frustrated, or, over it. Basically, I'm just over being on quarantine. I'm over being locked down. I'm over it. But in reality, what
Aren't
you
we
might
all?
be, yeah, I mean, and aren't we all? But in reality, you might actually be feeling anxiety or depression. So it's important to check yourself. Check yourself on those things and identify, and then realize that's okay. It's okay to feel that way, and it's okay to reach out for help, even though other people might be feeling that way. And I think only now recently as a society we've started that conversation. And it's a conversation that we've needed to have for decades. My first panic attack was when I was 10 years old. I was in 5th grade. We were running the mile in PE for the presidential health test, and I lived in California at the time. It was 110 degrees outside.
Ugh.
I started to have an asthma attack. My teacher at the time yelled at me because he thought that I was faking to get out of running the mile, which I can't blame him too much. I did do a lot of excuses to get out of exercise back in the day. but it exacerbated my anxiety, and it triggered a panic attack, and I actually passed out on the track.
Oh,
And
jeez.
that in itself created like this weird mental block because he yelled at me and didn't receive it. I then was like, "Oh, maybe I am being too dramatic," or and it's this was 20 years ago. No one was talking about that. And unfortunately, in my family, we didn't either. So it just kind of got swept under the rug. And I've spent the next 20 years or the following 20 years working through the fact that that was okay and that that's something that so many people experience. But back then I didn't know that. And so it's taken a long time for me to get to the place where I am. But I don't think a lot of people have really gotten there yet, or we're just now getting there. And I think it's such a great thing. And I think, like you said, everyone needs therapy. Again, another conversation that when I was a kid, no one did therapy. And if they did, they didn't talk about it. So,
Yeah, I'm probably butchering this quote, remembering it, but I think it was Kerry Washington who was like, someone, I think an interviewer, a reporter or whatever, asked her, like, oh, we heard you go to therapy, and like, are you working through something? And she's like, no, of course I go to therapy. It's like, I'm an actress. Like, I want to make sure that I'm taking care of myself so that I can be my best self. And I was like, oh, I was like, I like
and I think that's so
that.
helpful because then you're putting therapy in almost the self-care category, which
Hmm.
I think therapy should be part of your self-care routine. Everyone deserves to unpack their feelings with a neutral party because it's
Hmm.
hard to understand why we feel things or pinpointing the true basis of a feeling. I know that I struggle with that a lot, especially with my anxiety and the way it manifests in my thought process. I feel a certain way, and unfortunately, because of who I am as a person, a lot of time I'll I have a hard time processing my emotions. So I just put them through the most comfortable channel, which for me unfortunately is anger. And so I do have to sometimes sit down and almost unpack with myself, okay, are you actually genuinely angry or are you feeling nervous about something? Because
Hmm.
that could also be what's going on. And especially if you have depression, like you said, getting angry at things very easily, having that high level of irritation at the most common things is a sign of depression. So it's important to unpack if you're feeling those types of things, to unpack why and identify, are you legitimately angry at the situation or the person, or are you feeling anxious or depressed or some other way? And navigating that. It'll only help you grow as an individual person.
Hmm. Definitely. Well, yeah. I mean, that's those are our stories with depression, anxiety, and this is a special two-part episode.
Yes.
So tune in for episode 2 of mental health, and we're going to talk about ways that we helped get ourselves through depression and anxiety. And, hopefully it's some tips that can help anyone who's experiencing it now as well.
Yeah. And if you're listening to this, just know that you're not alone. It's it doesn't make you a bad person to experience anxiety and depression. So many of us do, and we still operate daily, and it doesn't have to define who you are. And join us for part 2 so we can talk about how we cope with it and how I spent 20 years trying to figure out what it all meant.
Well, until next time, guys.
Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.